Tonight on Capitol Journal, the primary runoffs are over and the ballot is set for November. We'll recap the election. State Senator Greg Albritton joins us to discuss the state's financial situation amid rising inflation. Dr. Julia Booth of the Medical Association of Alabama discusses the prospects of Medicaid expansion. And Brian Lyman of the Montgomery Advertiser offers his take on this week's elections and their implications. Randy Scott reports on still rising gas prices and how we can hope to save. Karen Goldsmith reports on a major gun trafficking crackdown in central Alabama. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. After this week's primary runoffs, the ballot is now set for the November general election. The big news, of course, was that Katie Britt, the former Business Council of Alabama president and Richard Shelby chief of staff, roundly defeated Congressman Mo Brooks in the Republican runoff for U.S. Senate. Britt claimed 66 of the 67 counties and won 63% of the vote, compared to Brooks' 37%. At her victory celebration, Britt told supporters that Alabama was ready for new blood to represent the state.
Alabama has spoken. We want new blood. We want fresh blood. We want someone who will fight for our Christian conservative values, who will fight for the freedoms and liberty this nation was founded on, and will fight for that American dream for the next generation and the next. But I want you to know, all the incredible people that we have met across this state, you have shared with us your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your concerns, your challenges, and your opportunities. Too often we have politicians that come down and lecture us instead of listen. And what I want you to know is I hear you.
Britt will face Democratic nominee Will Boyd in November. There was only one runoff on the Democratic side, and that was to decide the nominee for governor. Birmingham educator Yolanda Flowers defeated State Senator Malika Sanders-Fortier by a margin of 55% to 45%. She'll go on to face Governor Kay Ivey in November. Further down the Republican runoff ballot, Wes Allen defeated Jim Ziegler in the race for Secretary of State, 65 to 35. He'll face Democrat Pamela Lafitte in the general. Andrew Sorrell defeated Stan Cooke, 57% to 43%, in the race for auditor. There is no Democrat on the ballot, so Sorrell wins the position outright. The two incumbents on the Public Service Commission held on to their positions after primary challenges. Jeremy Oden defeated Brent Woodall, 52 to 48, and Chip Beaker defeated Robert McCollum, 63 to 37%. Finally, for North Alabama's 5th Congressional District, Dale Strong, the current head of the Madison County Commission, defeated former Huntsville Superintendent Casey Wardynski for the Republican nomination. That margin was 63 to 37%. He'll face Democrat Kathy Warner Stanton in November. There are a handful of election challenges before the Alabama Republican Party. Ballot distribution errors in Etowah County have led to contests of two close House races in Districts 28 and 29, where challengers are arguing that a new election should be called. And in East Alabama's Senate District 27, State Senator Tom Whatley is contesting his one-vote loss to challenger Jay Hovey. The party's steering committee is set to meet Saturday for a hearing on these challenges, and the meeting will not be open to the public. There was more progress on the state's prison construction plan this week. Officials approved a $725 million bond sale to help finance 2 modern prisons meant to house up to 4,000 inmates each. State Finance Director Bill Poole said the state is using less borrowed money than originally planned.
We approved the plan of finance essentially to move into the bond sale. We adopted a couple of resolutions, many technical in nature, but just to move forward with the projects. We can go through those in detail, but I think the documents are explanatory. The timeline for the projects, we will move into securing the financing. We have some civil dirt work underway at the projects, and we'll be excited to move forward with the ground up construction as soon as possible.
Law enforcement officials announced a major crackdown on gun trafficking and violence in Montgomery this week. 18 people were arrested on federal gun charges as a part of Operation Washout. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has the story.
We have gun violence not only in our state but throughout the nation. Every day that you wake up, every day that you go out, there's a potential site that you might see some type of crime being committed with weapons. We have to take it a day at a time, and we have to address it as we see it. We don't make the laws, we just enforce them. The weapons are easy to come by, and it's our job to go out every day and to take these weapons, illegal weapons, off the street.
These individuals represent the 10 local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies that recently conducted Operation Washout.
A national initiative focused on the investigation and arrest of violent fugitives, gang organizations, and non-compliant sex offenders with active warrants.
This operation was a collaboration of multiple agencies and the result of hours and hours of planning. In addition to the fugitive sweeps conducted throughout the Montgomery area that focused on individuals who are subject to state or local warrants, 18 federal defendants were arrested on various gun and drug charges.
The officials also say this operation was only the tip of the iceberg.
This was a small portion of our operation. So if you're still out there wanting to commit crime and you're still out there wanting to do things that you're not supposed to be doing, just know this was a small portion. We will be coming to a city near you very soon.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
2 local colleges are collaborating to flip the script on continuing education. Alabama State University and South University this week announced a partnership that allows nursing students a quicker and more affordable entry into the profession. ASU biology and pre-health seniors will now have early access to the South University nursing program, getting them on the fast track to help fill the nursing shortage in our state.
We talk about community, we talk about academic excellence, we talk about student success, and that is what this partnership is all about, making sure that we promote pathways for our students to be successful. Alabama State University has vetted the courses that are offered in the nursing programs so that we've made sure that there's an alignment, so that there's a seamless transition for our students.
One of our initiatives at South is to increase minority participation in STEM projects. And South has quite an array of science and also math and technology programs.
Well, we are all feeling the pain at the pump these days. While leaders debate temporary measures like a possible gas tax holiday, high gas prices are here to stay for a while. There are ways to save and conserve this summer. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has that story.
Everything costs more. There's longer waits now because of staffing issues in every industry, including automobile repair. So you have to be patient. You have to get your checkbook out, and it's not something that anybody's happy about for sure.
AAA Alabama spokesperson Clay Ingram says in a time where the price for everything has gone up, consumer paychecks haven't.
When you add this gas price increase to that equation, it means that people are putting a lot more money in their gas tank week to week, and that's a lot less money they have to pay for these other things that are also necessities.
There are efforts to help people save money and not overspend for daily needs, and topping that list is gas. Ways to help include keeping your car in shape.
That's also important to helping your car get the best possible gas mileage so that you're getting the best value you can on your miles per gallon when you're buying that expensive gas. So it's important to do that to help your gas mileage and to make sure that your vehicle lasts a lot longer, because they're so expensive right now that it's expensive to replace one.
If there are repair needs, Ingram says shop around for quality, affordable solutions.
Be prepared. If you need some automotive repair work done, maybe check around a little bit, talk to some different places that do that type of thing.
When buying gas, Ingram suggests staying close to where you live.
If you're not paying attention, you could potentially be paying 60 or 70 cents a gallon more than you need to pay for gas. So it's important that you are aware and paying attention to what the gas prices are in your normal travel area from day to day.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Next, I'm joined by State Senator Greg Albritton, chairman of the Senate General Fund Committee. Senator, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Do we still shake hands or bump or?
Well, yeah, we can do whatever you want.
Well,
yeah. I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on. I know it's been a busy time for y'all, an unusually busy summer. Y'all have been having these budget hearings, kind of unusual for the middle of the year like this, kind of the off season, but it's to do with inflation and how inflation is affecting these state agencies. What have you learned so far?
Well, first off, we've done this before. It's been a couple of years and since we've done it, but also remember that last year with the COVID, we cut them short. In fact, we didn't have many of them. It's time we started getting back in and educating ourselves and letting the agencies have a chance to be heard on where they stand. And given our uniqueness of where we are in this world, if you will, inflation and other pressures coming off the COVID matters, we felt it was necessary and good to start looking into things now. We're not asking the agencies to bring in requests at this point. We're simply asking for information to gauge where we are in the current budget that we're in and how they're faring with the inflation pressures.
I heard Cam Ward, director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, talk about cars, and how his agency uses cars for, parole, officers to travel around, check on their people. He said that's really hitting them hard. The gas prices are hitting them hard to where they're going to have to park cars basically and not do as much monitoring. That seems concerning.
It is very concerning because that means that law enforcement, probably at all levels, are having the same problem. That's something we need to look at, and the agencies need to start looking at that now, because when we roll over, we've already got the budget. When you start again on October 1st, the new budget, that's already set. Mm-hmm. The inflation wasn't here like it was at that point. Does that make any sense?
Sure. Well, gas prices are kind of along with that, right?
Exactly. So what we're looking at here is trying to gauge how the agencies are dealing with that and where the steps are. The difficulty also is we can't change that up much. We've got to find a pattern that we're going to deal with this and how we're going to allocate the resources better.
I was going to ask that because, okay, you passed the budgets in basically April.
Correct.
Right. So yeah, inflation wasn't really a thing back then, or not quite.
Not to the degree that we're in.
Right.
That's correct.
And gas prices certainly weren't yet. And so
and I don't mean to interrupt, but go back. We're in, we're not quite in our last quarter of the current budget, and certainly when we passed this more than a year or so ago, inflation was just beginning at that point.
Right.
And that's where the pressure's coming in there and in the future. We've got to get a handle on that.
So that's what I was going to get at is understanding that the fiscal year is going to start in October. Is there anything like? Theoretically, could there be a special session to pass a supplemental or anything like that to address inflation concerns in next year's budget?
Certainly, but we won't be able to do that until March, okay, unless there's a special session that's called.
Okay.
But to determine whether that's going to be needful or not, we need to have the hearings to see where we are.
I see. It doesn't look like inflation's going anywhere, at least anytime soon. Right, well, sure. And so, should we be concerned just about? We're talking about the stress on these agencies, on the state's finances. Should we be concerned long term about the state's financial situation?
I think you know the answer to that. We are concerned. not just on the pressures with the agencies in the state, but also for individuals. Everything that we're suffering and seeing, individuals are having even a more pronounced problem. And that's an issue we got to deal with too, I think. I don't know how that would happen, but inflation hurts everybody. The only question is how badly. And we got to get handled. We haven't done this inflation thing now for a number of years, almost 40 years. Most of us don't know how to deal with that and are unhappy about it, rightfully so. We've got to address it, at least locally. We can't control much of that from the state level, but we can control how we spend, because that's the key.
I was going to say that, it must be a little frustrating because, from the state perspective, the state can't pass a policy that really, affects inflation. This is a global, a national thing, and yet you have to deal with it. You have
Correct.
to deal with the problems that come along with that. So does the ARPA money, does anything change in terms of what we may be, the plans being put together to spend the ARPA 2 funds? Does inflation play into that at all?
Well, that's one reason we're having the hearings too, is to get a feel on where and how and if all those questions come in, which is also an issue of do we hold a special for that purpose or not? And the other is it legal? Can we use ARPA funds for some of that? We talk about gas prices on the inflation, but one of the biggest problems we're having is construction costs. Alabama's in a building frenzy right now, and on public and private, and those costs are going up exponentially. When we put out a bond for schools at $1.2 billion, and we did that some time ago, and yet when we start building, we can't build what we plan to build because that 1.2 is not 1.2 anymore. It's more like 0.9. Mm-hmm. So we've got to figure that out too. Do we trim back somewhere on that? We've got to look at those things.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, because the last time there's talk of the R word, recession, and it's not fun to talk about, but it's probably in your line of work worth planning for. And so I just remember the last recession that really kind of began in 2010. It lasted a few years. It was really devastating in terms of its impact on the state agencies, state budgets. In some ways, we're just now recovering from that, from some agencies like mental health, for example. So let me ask you, if there is another recession, do you think that same type of devastation would happen, or are we better prepared financially?
Yes, we're going to have another recession. The question is when. There's arguments made every day now that we already are in one. And if so, I don't have the answer to that, and technically we won't know that answer until the end of this month. But we feel it as far as individuals. We know that we can't purchase what we thought we could purchase, and it's causing us to change our habits. A recession, if it's not here, it will be here soon. We are more prepared now than we were back in 2010. If you recall, it was those years that was the last time we had proration in the state. Our intent and our prayer is that we do not suffer that problem. We have made every effort on the state level with savings accounts, with the way we manage the monies, the way we estimate our budgets, the way that the procedures that we use to try to protect the state from going through that trial. But that depends on how long it lasts and how deep it goes. All the preparations in the world may not be enough. Our concern from the budget side in the state is we've got to prepare for as bad as we can imagine it, if that makes sense, so that we can be prepared for whatever comes. We're trying to do that. We're trying to make sure that Alabama remains economically sound for the benefit of the state and all of our employees and all of our people.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you about how budgets kind of work in terms of the day-to-day, because in my mind, I see it as, okay, look at inflation, prices go up. Well, that also means the taxes go up, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so I was thinking like the tax revenue to the state might go up, just a little. But
That
is
depends
it
on
enough?
the tax.
Is it enough to keep up with inflation? I guess.
Let's use the gas tax, for example.
Okay.
Remember, that's not a gas. It's not like a sales tax in that it's based on the amount of the sales.
It's per gallon.
Per gallon.
Yeah.
Okay. When the gas prices go up, that means you buy less, so the revenue declines.
Mm-hmm.
The sales tax is geared to that, certainly. But the problem is, it changes the habits and the transactions decline. And when the transactions decline, everybody's revenue declines, private and public. That's where the recession hurts.
I see. To include like the online sales tax.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Was there any? I know that Kirk Fulford from the Legislative Services Agency presented. What were some of his findings in terms of what they're seeing revenue-wise right now?
Revenue-wise in Alabama, we're doing okay right now. We have enough to make it through the last quarter of this year. We have enough, frankly, based on what we have already received and will continue, we believe, to make it through this next fiscal year. All right? But halfway through that year is where it starts getting concerned. And we have time. With our preparations, we have bought time so that if the bottom does fall out, we'll have time to make some adjustments and make some other plans and such. Hence, while we're trying to do the hearings to get a grip on that now. The earlier we start looking at what the options are, the better off and prepared we'll be.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears to prisons. I know that this week the bond issue was agreed upon, or you're going to go to market with a bond issue. I'm hearing that even some site prep work is going on at Elmore and Escambia, where these two first projects are going on. How would you describe the progress so far on the prison construction plan?
I think the progress is moving along as well as it can given the circumstances. Now, personally, I would have liked to have had dirt flying last January. That simply was not feasible or possible. We were not prepared for that. But yeah, we have made great strides in getting everything, all the entities set up, all the plans done, everything as far as the bonding and such is moving along well. It's not completed yet, but we are moving forward with those matters. And keep in mind, we have over $500 million in the bank ready to get going with that too. You've mentioned about the site work. I've also had reports that site work is being done. I haven't gone out to take a look yet. I probably will, but I haven't seen that yet. But I believe we are making progress there. I think you're going to find that within the next few months, you will see things coming out of the ground.
Is it too early to estimate when a facility might open?
Not hard and fast, because in today's, getting the plumber to show is another matter, all right? But we anticipate that by 2026, by mid-2026, I think we'll have both of them operational.
Okay. We're just coming off an election, a primary, a runoff. Of course, there's going to be a general too. But there's, just in terms of this building in the State House, there's going to be a lot different. The legislature is going to look a lot different. New members, lots of retirements, a few people getting defeated. How do y'all deal with that in terms of new personalities, new members coming in with new ideas from a leadership perspective of organizing a brand new legislature?
I can't overemphasize, Todd, that politics, and in fact governing, deals a lot with personalities. Not just the policies, but the personalities. Whenever there's a change in personalities, that changes the whole. We're going to be having some changes made. We've got folks that we've got to incorporate, and some of us that's been around for a little bit have also got to change and figure out how we can deal with, for lack of a better term, the new guys. And there's a lot of training that goes on. There's a lot of instructions about how and when, and the joke is getting the key to the bathroom or whatever. But really and truly, how do you file a bill? Where do you get the bill prepared? and those, not to mention who can help you, who will help you, and who's going to hurt you. And we've got a lot of maturing now that some of this has been resolved. How do we do that? We start making contact with each other. We start reaching out to everybody to get to know ourselves, and also to reestablish the relationships that we have in existence. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Sure.
It's like a family reunion. You know, when you come in from a family reunion and all of a sudden the cousin has grown up and it's a different relationship.
Yeah.
Especially in Alabama, right?
Well, okay. While I've got you real quick, there's been talk of a special session for ARPA. There's also been talk of waiting until next session, just the next regular to do those spending plans. In your estimation, what are the chances of a special session before next year?
It's up to the governor. I'll come in when the governor calls us. I try to make myself prepared for any type of thing that may come up, whether that special session may be for ARPA, whether it be dealing with something other in the budget, or whether it be dealing with gaming and gambling. I'll be ready.
Okay. Well, look, thanks again for all your time, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Brian Lyman, state government reporter for the Montgomery Advertiser. Brian, thanks for coming on the show.
Todd, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have you on here because of your expertise covering state politics and state government after this election. Mm-hmm. A lot of our viewers read you every day in the Advertiser, but there's a lot maybe that aren't from Montgomery. Mm-hmm. So I was hoping you could sort of talk about your background as a journalist, especially here in Alabama.
Sure. I've worked for 3 newspapers in Alabama, and I have covered Alabama politics mostly continuously since 2006. So from the time of Bob Riley to the age of Kay Ivey, I've been here.
Well, it was a really significant election
Mm-hmm.
we just had this week. It was a runoff election, but a lot got decided.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the Senate, the U.S. Senate, big race there. What were some of your takeaways from Katie Britt's big win over Mo Brooks?
Well, for starters, one has to give credit to Britt. She did run a statewide campaign. I mean, Britt is somebody who was very well known within the establishment, obviously a longtime aide to Richard Shelby, a former head of the Business Council of Alabama. So she certainly had the establishment backing. To her credit, she did try to introduce herself into the grassroots, which I think ended up probably pushing her over the top. She was not guaranteed to win this race. I think she called herself the underdog on Tuesday, and I felt like that was a bit much. I felt like she always had the essential advantage here, but she could have just as easily lost this had she just counted on that establishment support. But, she went out into the state. She talked to all the Republican clubs. The people who know politics in the state were very comfortable with her, knowing her background with BCA, knowing her background with Richard Shelby. And the people who didn't know anything about politics were Republican voters who didn't know anything about politics, were either comforted by her ads where, she obviously threw a lot of red meat to primary voters, or on the other side, maybe they were just turned off by her opponent and felt more comfortable with her. So this was real, and let's not minimize the fact she had a major cash advantage in this race. She was able to raise it. She was, as we saw from the TV ads, she was able to spend it, and she was able to. She was real. I think what was really striking to me, on May 24th. She won a majority of the Wiregrass, which is not surprising because that's her native. She's from Coffee County. That's her native area. But a Republican who does that in a primary is in excellent shape to move on to the general election. Brooks did very badly. In fact, I think he may have even finished behind Mike Durant in the Wiregrass at that point. So Britt really, once she did that, even though she only got like 45% of the votes, she really had herself well established in those strong Republican areas. It was always her race to lose, and to her credit, she did enough to not only maintain what she got on May 24th, but expand it significantly on Tuesday night.
I agree, especially on the, we talk about the statewide. I remember both nights, the primary May 24th and Tuesday night in the runoff, just seeing these rural counties come in. Right. They're not a ton of votes, but when you see these margins of these rural counties, and they're all for Katie Britt, it's clear that they had a grassroots, focus on every county, not just the suburbans. And you mentioned Mo Brooks, her opponent Mo Brooks. So something has to be said about the fact that he had the Trump endorsement. He had the thing that everybody wanted in this race, and maybe I don't know, didn't use it because obviously he went down to the polls. Trump rescinded the endorsement. Can you see a scenario where if maybe he gets on TV in January and spends a lot of money telling people?
Yeah.
'Cause I bet a lot of voters didn't even know that he had the Trump endorsements. Did he? I don't know. Did he misuse that political gift?
I think it's interesting to me. I spoke with Republican voters on May 24th and on Tuesday, and they said that the Trump endorsement was at best only part of the reason that they voted for him. I think Trump has a certain pull. The advantage of the Trump endorsement for Brooks was that Brooks has never, when he runs in a statewide race, he has always struggled outside of Huntsville. Like outside his home district, people just don't know who he is. So the Trump endorsement was for him like a good way to introduce himself to the rest of the state. Part of the problem that Brooks has, though, is I think what attracts Brooks supporters to Brooks, and I certainly heard this on Tuesday as well, was that they admire the fact that he's consistent and that he's outspoken. But that also leaves him very vulnerable to attack for being consistent and outspoken. He's consistently voted against renewing these authorization, these use of force resolutions in Congress because he believes that Congress should revote on these things and not simply renew it. Well, that's been a point of attack for him. It was Luther Strange used it to attack him in 2017. It was used against him again this year. So. I think the Trump endorsement, it could have taken him to a certain point, but then he would have really had to have run a campaign that Brooks really has never felt comfortable running in the state. Like he's not somebody who's really trying to reach out to other voters. He's not trying to reassure other people. He's a guy who says, this is what I stand for. Some of the things he stands for are obviously quite controversial. And can raise questions, but he's not going to be anything else other than what he is. And I think if that leads to people who support him really liking him, it also really hurts his ability to reach out to other people and to raise the money that can prevent the kinds of attacks that we see from people like Katie Britt and Mike Durant.
And speaking of Trump, last point on this race is Trump really wanted the win, right? He wanted the win, so he endorsed Katie Britt late. You see a lot of national headlines basically saying, hey, Trump endorsed candidate wins. But I think we know here in Alabama, she was well on her way to winning before the Trump endorsement.
She had the constituencies, as I said before, people in politics felt much more comfortable with Britt than they did with anybody else. And she was able to tailor a message that was very much, that threw all that red meat out there that, gave other people who are, who may not pay that much attention to politics, all that stuff. I mean, we have to be frank here. I mean, Trump's endorsements are increased. They're not setting trends anymore. They're following trends. I mean, he's really trying to stay relevant in this new environment where I think, like 4 years ago, everybody felt the need that they had to really like kowtow to
kiss
him.
the ring.
Yeah. Now I think people feel comfortable doing lip service. I mean, if you remember from Britt's acceptance speech last Tuesday, she didn't thank Trump until like almost
it was a footnote
at the very end.
Yeah. And so it was even then it was not that much.
Exactly. She just basically said, "Thanks for taking us over the top." Not like, "You did it for me, Donnie. You really did it." And I think we're going to see, if that trend holds, I mean, I think we are going to see less of an interest in doing anything more than paying lip service to him down the road.
Switching gears, Secretary of State. It's a down ballot race, a really important job. And a lot of people were surprised. I was surprised to see Wes Allen surge to such a significant victory. What do you think happened there?
First of all, let's look at finances. I mean, Allen by far had the most money of anybody in the race. He outspent the field. He may have spent more money than the rest of the Republican field combined. So doing that will obviously give you a lot of oxygen and help you get your message across. I think he supported the kinds of voting laws that I think base Republicans really like. The day after the primary, I asked both him and Jim Ziegler, do you support any measures to make voting more convenient or easier? And both of them said no. I mean, so they were all very much about election security and whatnot. The other thing too, and I don't know if you picked up on this yourself in your own reporting, but I talked to a lot of Republicans who basically, they didn't really see this as a vote for one person as much as a vote against a person. I mean, like I heard of people who were supporting Allen because they didn't want Ziegler. I heard people who were supporting Ziegler because they didn't want Allen. So the long and short of it is, I mean, I really think Allen's benefited from a really strong spending and a pretty focused message, but there's any number of ways there are any number of things you can read into that result.
Another significant election happening was the Sanders family. Malika Sanders, 48, was running for governor. She lost to Yolanda Flowers. Hank Sanders ran for his old seat that Malika had had these last 4 years, and he lost. So for the first time in 40 years, we're not going to have a Sanders, involved in Alabama politics. The Selma politics better than most. What were some of the circumstances there?
That is one thing you have to understand is that area is very balkanized between different groups of Democrats. It's very competitive. Sometimes it can be very ugly. I think Hank Sanders got started late in that race. It wasn't really clear if his daughter was going to run again for state senate or if she was going to go elsewhere. So I think that kind of put him on his back heel. But I think too, Sanders had a distinguished career in the Senate, longtime chair of the budget committees there in the Senate, Education Budget Committee in the Senate there. But I think in that kind of atmosphere in Selma, I think there are just people who are really willing to look at a change. With Malika Sanders, 48. I think what strikes me about the Democratic gubernatorial race was on the Republican side, I think it was something like $26 million was spent on that primary, 4 times what we spent in 2018. On the Democratic side, it was maybe closer to $27,000 in total. When I spoke with Democratic voters on Tuesday, and again, I've been doing this since 2006, but this is really the first time I've ever spoken to voters. There were 2 candidates on Tuesday's ballot, Sanders Fortier and Yolanda Flowers, educator Yolanda Flowers, and the Democratic voters I spoke with all said they didn't know who either candidate really was. So I really think in that situation it was. In that situation, I mean, if you told me that it was basically like people voted for who was top on the ballot, I wouldn't be surprised by that. I mean, outside of if you look at the voting patterns that night, I mean, Sanders Fortier did best in the Black Belt, in the Western Black Belt, which is her Senate district. Flowers did well everywhere else. I mean, my feeling is that like where Sanders Fortier was known, she did well, but really, I don't know that very many Democrats who cast a ballot this year really understood who the candidates were or where they stood.
The Senate District 27. This is the Tom Whatley versus Jay Hovey race. One vote. So Senator Tom Whatley, current state senator, chair of the Judiciary Committee here, defeated by 1 vote by Hovey. But now Whatley is contesting this election, basically arguing that Democrats crossed over to vote in the Republican primary. Now, there's no laws against that. There's no policies against that for the Republican Party, but he's basically trying to get the Republican Party to overturn that election and give him the election. Do you see that effort succeeding? I know it's hard to get inside the heads of the executive committee.
Yeah, I will. I mean, yeah, I could. If I could tell you that, I would love. I would. I'd probably be paid a lot more than I am.
Well, let me ask it this way. What if they did? What if they overturned this election, gave it to Whatley, even though just by one vote? Do you see that being, a really significant? I could see like uproar from voters saying, "Hey, wait a second! You're overturning the will of the voters."
So let's look at that district because it is centered on Lee County, but I believe it's Tallapoosa and Russell County are in there as well. If you look at the results from that race, Whatley did exceptionally well in Tallapoosa and Russell County, just blew Hoovie out of the water out there. In Lee County, though, I think Hoovie did exceptionally well. The margin may not have been nearly as close if Lee County's turnout had been better. It was abysmal on May 24th. So you overturn that result. The Democrats do have a candidate in that race. Reese, yeah. And you have to look at the trend lines for Lee County. Lee County has been moving to the left. It's nowhere near where Madison County is, where Madison County seems to be very close to a tipping point, but Lee County is getting there. If the Republican Party does something like this, Whatley could still hold on to win. I mean, it's going to be a good year for Republicans. The Democrats may not be able to raise a whole lot of money, and Whatley can always do that. But you're also giving the Democrats a great opportunity to say, if you don't like the way that your vote was handled in the springtime, why don't you take a look at us in November? So it could be. It's fascinating to me that like this would overturning that race would be potentially poisonous for Republicans in Lee County, and in a place, I should add, in Lee County where they really can't afford to be, like the kind of Republican you may see in other parts of Alabama.
Maybe poisonous statewide, and I think Jay Hovey would also have a good argument for a write-in campaign, because he, like I said, won the election.
Yeah, and I should say too, I mean, I think he spent like maybe $96,000 to Whatley's like $1.2 million. So yeah.
There's a lot of talk in the Republican Party right now about this crossover vote. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it was more of the establishment mainstream candidates that prevailed this time. It wasn't the farther right wing candidates that didn't. And so those that supported those candidates say, oh, well, it's the Democrats that are crossing over. And so you're hearing a lot of talk of, well, we're going to close the primary system. Yeah. We're going to, which would take legislation to close the primary system where only sworn Republicans can vote in the Republican primary and only sworn Democrats can vote in the. It seems to me that could be problematic because a lot of Alabamians, while they may be conservative, may not call themselves a Republican. A lot of an independent streak.
Yeah. I think to me, that would be like hyper gerrymandering. I think you would suddenly get a lot of ever more extreme candidates in those races if you were to do that. Look, the Democrats are crossing over for the simple reason that the Democratic statewide ticket just isn't that strong this year. They wanted to have a say in who was going to run the state and who was going to do that. So, I mean, I don't know how you measure that statistic, but if Democrats are crossing over, it's just simply because they really don't have a lot of folks that they can really look at and say have a chance in November.
Just like years ago in the 80s and before, where Republicans, if you wanted to have a say in the election, you might as well vote in the Democratic primary.
Right. And they were playing a game of defensive voting in that situation. Again, I think if you are to do that, I mean, you're going to get a lot more of the kind of like Roy Moore kind of candidates, and you're going to see that a lot more often. And I'm sure that's not something like a lot of groups, like say the Business Council of Alabama, are going to be pretty happy to see as they move forward. So
there's always the unintended consequences.
Exactly.
We're out of time, but Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your expertise.
Todd, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by Dr. Julia Booth, President of the Medical Association of the State of Alabama. Dr. Booth, thanks for coming on Capital Journal again.
Thank you for the invitation.
I know that we are coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the Obamacare Affordable Care Act Sebelius case, the Supreme Court case that essentially sent the decision for whether or not to expand Medicaid back to the states. As the Affordable Care Act was passed by Congress, Medicaid expansion was in there. People challenged it, states challenged it, saying that should be a state decision. That's what the Supreme Court says. So it's really been 10 years since then. Alabama is one of 12 or so states that did not expand Medicaid. And so I wanted to ask you, from your perspective as a doctor, what kind of consequences has that led to here in Alabama?
Well, it's more obvious about our coverage issues that we've had. Personally, I practice in Pickens County, which has had closure of a hospital in that amount of time. And it was directly related to Medicaid. That wasn't the only thing going on. But the truth of the matter is, when they passed the Affordable Care Act, they used funds that used to help keep small rural hospitals open to fund the Affordable Care Act. So not only did we lose, we lost two different ways. There's some numbers out there that say hospitals that were in areas that did expand Medicaid saw a decrease in their uncovered patients by about 55%, and in the states like Alabama that did not expand, it was 18%. So that's a significant, difference there, and that's been felt throughout. And like I say, our small hospital couldn't withstand the loss of the disproportionate share funds, which were funds that the federal government provided, knowing that small rural hospitals didn't have the volumes that larger hospitals had. But those are some of the funds that they used to actually pay for the Affordable Care Act. So other states kind of got dollars that used to come to Alabama.
Well, the legislature, governors, the legislature, really in this whole period of time have essentially said, look, we just can't pay for it. Yes, they offered incentives at the front end, but there is a cost to the state, and especially at that very beginning time, budget shortfalls and everything, they just said we can't pay for it. But I also understand that when you do expand Medicaid, it comes with other funds and maybe boosts rural areas like you were talking about.
Right, because if you can stabilize the local economy, you can end up helping lots of things. And that's one of the things that we're hopeful for now, is that maybe we can get everybody on board for expansion. Even the majority of your conservative voters are even now saying yes, they're for Medicaid expansion, which was not something that was supported 10 years ago. Again, a lot of that was not looking at that ripple effect. It was looking at the sheer dollars that the state was going to be required to chip in after year 3, 4, 5, and those numbers seemed huge at the time, but now we know it's cost us so much that it was definitely it would have been worth doing that then. But, we can't cry over spilled milk. It's time to move on, and it's time for us to do what we need to do for the citizens of our state.
Well, I remember back then. I mean, you're talking 2010, basically 2009, 2010, and, first of all, it was called Obamacare, and even President Obama sort of embraced that. So, that's a no-go from Republicans. And also just the word Medicaid. A lot of conservatives over the years have just resisted. They don't like that. They don't like the whole government healthcare sort of thing. But that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, really. Do you think that has kind of changed? I mean, President Obama is long gone, and the politics have changed a little bit. Do you think it's more acceptable to Republicans, conservatives, understanding that Medicaid is the name, but you're really talking about health care?
Well, the truth of the matter is some people lost their health care coverage through all this. Either their employer could not afford it or they fell in a gap. And so foreseeing that was not something people did at the time either. And so now people who used to have insurance that no longer have it. They don't qualify for Medicaid, they fall in a gap, and so they can't get out of it. They can't purchase anything through the exchange because they don't qualify. So not only do they not qualify for Medicaid, they don't even qualify to purchase their own insurance through an affordable means.
Well, what would your advice be to the legislature? We're going through an election right now. We do have more money than in previous years. I mean, we've never seen the budgets like they have. So, what would your message be to the legislature in terms of? I know you're for expanding Medicaid, but what would your sales pitch be to this Republican-led legislature and to the governor?
Well, I don't think there's ever been a time such as this to make that decision. Like, we have so many extra funds to allow us to do a stable expansion. Obviously, the legislature has already piqued their interest because they've expanded for OB. The postpartum services are expanded for a year. It is just a pilot, but I think that was the first little step toward full expansion. At least I'm hopeful that was the decision for that. The funds right now that are coming from the feds are like nothing we've seen before. So again, it's a time where we can do that, make sure we've got programs in place that we can continue to fund whenever those do run out, because they will. But again, we've got to do something to stabilize the economy for those individuals in our state.
Mm-hmm. If we could switch gears, I'd love to ask you just kind of for an update on some COVID-related issues. We have seen a bit of an uptick in terms of cases in the state. What are you seeing on the ground in your practice?
We are seeing a slight increase, I will say. We don't see the severe illness cases near like we were. The hospital numbers presently have not really significantly risen, but we are still seeing, active cases. We'll see a little burst of, in a local private clinic, maybe up 15 or 20 in a day, and then the next couple of days maybe you just see 4 or 5, compared to 2 or 3 months ago where we might go days without seeing any positive COVID. So there is a little bit of a boost in that. Vaccine hesitancy is still an issue. We still offer vaccines. As you know, they're approved down to even the elementary age. We continue to encourage that at each visit at the office, and patients are still, now choosing to do that initial series. So it's not as much of I'm never ever going to get a COVID vaccine as I think we had in the beginning with a lot of patients. We're seeing more where they're willing to, consider it and talk about it, and just leave that kind of open-ended.
Well, and you mentioned something before that I didn't realize, that the vaccines. I mean, you have to have health care coverage for vaccines. Originally, you basically just walked in and got one. So now you have to have insurance to pay for that? Yeah, the coverage for the administration is no longer available to everybody. So a lot of clinics are still going to do it, and what I call just write it off, do it for free. But there is a cost involved in that, because there's supplies that you have to use, there's staff time, there's documentation that we have to do. And if you don't have any health insurance coverage, there's a cost associated with that. And that coverage ended a few months ago. Same thing for COVID treatment. That was also provided, and the administration of the monoclonal antibodies, that was covered, but again, that time has ended, and so it's no longer covered for everyone. Most people we can find somewhere where we can still get you treatment, though. Wow. So if you come down with COVID and you have a bad case and got to go to the hospital and all that, if you don't have health coverage, those bills are going to pile up. That's right. Wow. Well, that kind of goes back to the Medicaid question, and I wanted to kind of go back to that for a second, if we may, because talk to me about what it's like on the ground. There is a certain percentage of the population that's covered by Medicaid right now. It's a small percentage. It's mostly children and the very poor. Right. And so you're talking about, in terms of expansion, increasing that to a threshold that's still low income, but just more people would have coverage. In your practice, do you run into families that are in that gap that they don't qualify for Medicaid, maybe they don't have it through their employer? What do they do? What does that family do to pay for the coverage that you're providing, pay for a doctor's visit, a hospital visit even? Well, again, children fall in a unique category, and a lot of times we can get them covered either with Medicaid or with the CHIPS fund, with all kids, as we call it in Alabama. But it's those working adults that are the ones that fall in that gap. There are, free clinics
smattered around. Most clinics, like at my private practice, we have a self-pay fee that we'll do that just kind of covers most of our costs, not all of them. We still lose a little on that. But like I said, I would say most clinics offer something like that, and that's what patients have to do. The majority just do without, because they do not have the ability to pay.
I was going to ask, do they just put off regular health care until something catastrophic happens, basically?
Yes, and the data proves that people don't do the screenings, that cancers are not found early. We have a lot of what I call stopgap programs in Alabama, like we have the ABC program. So that's a way to enroll certain aged women for cervical cancer screening, breast cancer screening. There's certain parts of our state that have colon cancer screening available. But again, it's not statewide and it's not open to all of the citizens.
Well, look, we're out of time, but I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your perspective on this for our audience.
Great. Thank you for the invitation.
We'll be right back.
The Alabama Department of Archives and History was founded in 1901, becoming the nation's first publicly funded independent state archives agency. The archives identifies, preserves, and makes accessible records and artifacts of enduring historical value to the state. Thomas Owen founded the agency and served as its first director. He was succeeded by his wife, Marie Bankhead Owen, who headed the archives for 35 years and was the second woman to lead a state agency.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week, Friday at 7:30, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.